Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting episode. We have a great guest tonight, a fellow who helped start this show, Lanny Swerdlow. We're going to cut out our hemp news, but let's bring on the infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
All right, if you or a loved one are looking for a doctor to help you get a medical marijuana permit, we can help. Call us at 503-235-4606. That's 503-235-4606, as you can see right there on your screen. Here's our interview with Lanny Swerdlow.
I'd like to introduce my old friend, Lanny Swerdlow, formerly a Portlander, but originally from California. And you've been back in California for how long? 25, 26 years now?
I moved back here in 2000, so it's been 24 years.
About that, yeah. So,
but I lived in California. I was born and reared in Los Angeles, and I stayed there until I was about 22, and then I left for Humboldt State College, and I was 2 years up there, and then I moved to Portland, Oregon, and I was there for till the year 2000. I moved back down to Palm Springs, where I have lovingly resided ever since.
how long did you live in Portland?
30 years.
That's quite a while.
That's quite a block of my life. Yes.
When we first met, you were already producing four other shows, right?
No. When we first met, I was producing Night Scene, which was a sort of a gay night show in which we had entertainers and then we had speaker guests from the gay community. And then after that, I started doing a show called Outrageous, which was the live performances put on by the city kids at my club every night. And then I was producing a show called Bunk Busters, which was produced by the United States Atheist Center in there. And then I started doing Cannabis Common Sense. So here I was doing 4 shows for Portland Cable Access, and I was being accused of undermining the morals of youth because the shows I was producing, which I produced at my club, was Night Scene, elevating gay youth above straight youth, Outrageous, elevating drag queens, Bunk Busters, elevating atheism, and then Cannabis Common Sense, elevating cannabis. So I was not favorably viewed by, let's say, the more conservative element in the Portland community.
Well, right. I remember when I think his name was Jensen, Officer Jensen, who was in charge of the marijuana task force, decided that he would come and arrest you. And eventually it was thrown out because obviously it was some kind of weird setup. Do you want to talk about that at all?
I don't. Well, the only time I was ever arrested for marijuana in Portland was when my house, somebody claimed that I was growing marijuana in my basement. And so the police came with this entire squad of police officers, which I wasn't growing in my basement, but I did have one very poor plant in my backyard. And they arrested me and took me and booked me and charged me with 2 Class A felonies, one for production of marijuana and one for production for sale. All it was one very scraggly 3-foot plant. I mean, it was something. They were going to. It must have been after me, I guess. And it was kind of interesting because at the time I was then taken to. I was arrested and given citations and this kind of stuff. And my attorney, we had to go to a pre-trial conference, and I can't remember who was the Charles. I can't remember who was a DA at the time, a deputy DA, and my defense was Boyd. What was it? It was called to be the Charles Boyd defense, something like that. He was a deputy DA, and what had happened was I was with a friend of mine by the name of. Oh my gosh, it's been so long ago. It's all a blur in my head. And he was running for governor for the state of Oregon. And he was just a minor candidate. And he is complaining to me that nobody was paying any attention to him. And so I says, well, why don't you come out in favor of this ballot initiative, which was on legalizing marijuana? So what year was that, Paul?
Well, there was one on the ballot in 1986.
19 when?
5.
That's when 1985.
Yeah, that's the first one I worked on.
That's when it was. And so
legalized.
we were listening to this radio show in which this Charles Boyd was the DA there, along with the head of the with the Portland Police Union. And I called in and I says, well, listen, why don't you? I called in and I says, you should support. Why doesn't the police support this thing there? It's why do you waste all your time on marijuana fences and this kind of stuff? And this Charles Boyd, who was with the DA's office, says, oh, well, we never arrest people who only have a couple plants. And so we had this pretrial defense conference. We said, well, listen, our defense is going to be, we're going to subpoena this deputy DA who told on the radio that they don't arrest anybody who has only a couple plants. And the DA, the prosecuting DA there said, oh my God, he could just see this being court, a DA being summoned there to testify what he said on the radio show. And so what he says, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll lower it to possession of less than an ounce of marijuana, which is an infraction. And my lawyer says in his entire career, he has never seen 2 felonies be reduced to an infraction. And so I pled guilty to an infraction, paid a $100 fine, and that was the end of it.
Right. Yeah, that was something there. So,
but they went after my club. They went after my club as a drug house.
That's what I was talking about initially, that they came in and raided your club, and it was the marijuana task force. It's while you were producing our show as well. And we had done some benefits for the marijuana initiative in that building. It was 333 Southwest.
Oh, no, my club was raided when we were at the City Nightclub at 13 Northwest 13, way before then.
That was a different one.
Yeah, they were always after me.
Yeah. Do you remember when you were raided at 333 Southwest Park Avenue?
Oh, I remember and that had nothing to do with marijuana. But this is what they had. You ready for this one? You want to go into this one?
Yeah, but I remember that the people who actually charged you were the marijuana task force. They didn't have the marijuana task force hat on, but they were after you because you were helping legalize marijuana.
Well, the reason what happened in this particular case was I had the studio and I was producing all these shows. Marijuana show, the atheist show, the night scene show, the gay teen drag queen show, and but I think you're right that part of it was to take the marijuana show off the air. But what they did is I was out of town, and while I was out of town, my manager was running the club, and what had happened is I came back on a Friday night. And I noticed that the control room for the studio, for the television studio, was open. And I said, it shouldn't be open. So I ran in there, and there was this kid who I knew, and he was showing a videotape that he had made of himself masturbating at the club. And what had happened was, after the club closed one night on a Wednesday night, he talked to my manager, my assistant manager, who was only like 23, and said, hey, let's make a video of me masturbating. I really want to do this. It'd be lots of fun to do. And so he said, sure, let's do it. And he set up a 3-camera setup there with 3 cameras. And he was in the control room, and this kid stripped naked and masturbated in front of the 3 cameras. And he did all the video work in the control room. And here he was, and he made this video. And so I saw this video. He says, hey, you can't do that. This is because, I says, put it away, give it to me. And I didn't know what to do about it. So the next day, I went down to my attorney, and I said, look, here's what happened. And I said, what should I do? Well, the attorney got out all his books and went through them and looked. He said, destroy the tape. Destroy this tape. I said, okay. I said, can I do that with this not evidence? He said, no, destroy it. Destroy the tape. So he got the tape and destroyed the tape. But what happened was I didn't have lots of money to buy professional cameras. So what I bought was these Hi8 cameras that would have lines out that would go into the control room so they could do the editing work with the video controller. But the problem with these Hi8 cameras is that in order to film, you had to have a videotape in them running, because if you didn't have a videotape in them running, they would shut off after a couple minutes. So every one of these 3 cameras each had the tape in there. And after they made this tape of the kid, they put it in there, and somebody had it in for my assistant manager. They stole the tapes and turned one into the police department. The police department saw, oh my God, look, they made a picture of the 16-year-old masturbating. And they used that to go after me. And you're right, they had the marijuana task force, they had the state police, they had the state sheriff's office, they had the FBI. And they raided the club, and they took all the video equipment out of the club, which of course ended the shows. And they also, for good measure, raided my home. And they came in at 8 in the morning, and they knocked the door down with a battering ram. My boyfriend and I were asleep in our bed. They got us out of the bed. We were naked. And for the next 15 or 20 minutes, while all these cops were running around over the house, we were just standing there naked. And finally, one cop said, hey, maybe we should give them something to wrap around themselves, which they did. And eventually it allowed us to get dressed. And they just confiscated everything out of the house. Now, what was funny here was I had inherited this houseboat from a friend of mine. He loaned it to me before, and when he died, he had left me in his will to have the houseboat. And in the houseboat, he had what we referred to the David Evans Memorial Gay Porn Collection. And what he had done was he had rented all these 1970s gay porn films, and he copied all of them, most of them on beta. And there must have been over 300 of them. I had never looked at hardly any of them. And the cops took them all. Well, eventually, they never charged me with anything, because there's never anything to charge me with. But they gave me all the equipment back, all the camera equipment, and this is like 6 months later. So they took us off the air. 6 months later, and all the computers back and everything, and I got all these videotapes back. And every single videotape had this mark on it that it was reviewed. I was thinking, my gosh, how much money did the government spend to hire somebody to sit through probably about 3 hours on each tape, 400 tapes, 1,200 hours of this 1970s poor quality gay porn. This is what our taxpayers' money went through. And it was just absurd. But you're right. Part of the reasons they went after me was because of the shows I was producing for marijuana legalization. But they also went after me because they've always had a hard-on for me way back when I did my very first club. And the police would come into my club, and they would bust kids for curfew. In fact, there was one night when they pulled up a paddy wagon, they pulled all kinds of cops in there, and they actually had a police riot. They came into my club, and they were knocking kids down to the door, beating them up. The kids were bloody. They were taking them down, throwing them into a paddy wagon, and taking them down to jail. And at that point, I said I had to do something about stop this. This was crazy. And so I contacted back the same attorney. He was my first attorney back then. I told him what was going on, and he got out his law books again, and he looked through them all. He says, they can't do that. And he wrote a letter to the city attorney telling the cops, you can't do that. You can't go into a private business and bust people for curfew. And the city attorney of Portland agreed, you can't do that. and they sent a letter to the police department saying you immediately cease going into private businesses and busting people for curfew, which is one of the major ways that the police department made a bust for curfew. And they love curfew busts because it looks so good. They made it's very easy to do, and it's very safe. You know, when you're busting a 16-year-old kid, you're not likely to get have the same kind of problem busting an adult. And I just pulled the rug out totally from underneath that, and they've never been able to give me. And what would happen, what was really interesting, is after they couldn't go into the club anymore, what they did was they stationed 2 juvenile officers in front of my club every single night. And they waited for kids to leave the club, and then they would go up to them and they would bust them for curfew when they were leaving the club. And so the kids had to stay there until 5 a.m. sometimes because the police were standing out there waiting for them to leave the club. So I went to then Charles Jordan, who was the city commissioner at that time, and he was in charge of the police bureau. And I went to him, I said, listen, this is what's going on. He said, oh, no, that's not what's going on. They wouldn't be doing that. I said, yes, they would. So he sent one of his aides to come down to the club one night to see what was going on. And the aide went back to Charles Jordan and said, yes, that's exactly what's happening. They are stationing 2 juvenile officers in front of that club, and they are out there 10, 12 hours waiting for some kid to come out of the club. And so I got a call from Charles Jordan. He said, come on over, come on down. We're going to take care of this right away. And I learned a big political lesson. Charles Jordan got on the phone, and he got the head of the juvenile department on the phone. He says, hey, this is Charles Jordan. You've put in for a big increase in your budget for the juvenile department, and I was going to go along with that. But, I have a real problem with that. If you have so much time with your police officers, you can send 2 police officers in front of this club all night long waiting to bust some kids for curfew. Well, we never saw the cops out there again. But once again, I pulled the rug out from them, and so they hated my guts. They were always. This is when they went back to the city nightclub, and the raids and for drugs and all this kind of stuff, all made up stuff. And but this time, and of course, and that's what the rage. Anyway, that's my history with the Portland Police Bureau. And I had an agreement with the Portland Police Bureau that if there was any kind of problems, they would contact me first. But anyway, never mind.
They never did. They never did that.
No, and they never got me anything. It was all just to cause me problems because I was doing things that they didn't think should be being done. In other words, elevating the gay communities, telling gay kids it's okay to be gay, telling atheists, putting out the word about atheism, and that all these churches, they can't all be right, but they can all be wrong, and of course making cannabis legal.
Right. Well, I remember, we started the Cannabis Common Sense show. You were already doing several. You had the equipment.
Oh, so, yeah.
And then when this happened, I didn't know you until that started. And I think we started that in 1996.
It started before, about a year or so before the medical marijuana initiative was on the ballot in Oregon.
Yeah, that was 98 was when, we got the signatures in 97 for a vote in 98. But we both started this show, and I remember when they came in and raided your club on Park Avenue, that they put your name on the front of the newspaper. And
this thing in front of the newspapers. I mean, for years I had been doing, running these clubs for gay youth, running these shows and stuff. Thousands of kids would come to the club. These were kids who were scorned, and this is the only place they ever felt safe, was coming down to my clubs. They put on these productions and kind of stuff. We had this big pageant called Rosebud and Thorn, all this kind of stuff. The newspapers, and I would send them information about it. I would say, hey, come down, take a look at what we're doing. Meet these young people and this kind of stuff. Total ignoring. But suddenly we get busted by the police, and the big headline of the Oregonian, child pornography bust at gay nightclub.
And it was the police.
They ignored us for 20 years. All the thousands of kids whose lives have been, who made so much better. Not a word.
I remember it was shortly after you got that all thrown out that you left Portland, and you went to
Well, I didn't leave right afterwards, and I stayed till 2000. I stayed there for 3 years. I worked for the Census Bureau. I kind of just bounced around a bit, but then I moved to Portland. I moved to Palm Springs.
Yeah, and then my friend Bill, who's producing this show now, he came forward, and we took the classes at Portland Community. It was called Portland Cable Access then. Now it's
Right.
Open PDX, and we kept it going after you moved. So here we are. We're still doing it.
And
So-
that's an interesting history, and it was a very exciting time.
I know. Well, 1996, October of 1996. I remember we filmed our first shows. It was just me by myself for the first 4 or 8 shows. We would go into the city nightclub, and I hadn't been there before, but we went in there, and I would talk by myself to the camera, which I found kind of difficult to do. For at that time, the show was 30 minutes, and so after the next batch, I had the attorney Paul Loney come on and help me co-host the show from about show number 9 through
That's
show
right.
225 or something. And you produced all of those, the first 120. I still have some of them, and a few of them are online, but most of them aren't. We got an incredible archive, but
Well, if you lost all those first 125 shows, that's part of Portland history.
I didn't lose them all. I think I've got a bunch on 3/4-inch videotape here. I just have to transfer somehow. I wish I'd gotten all those 3/4-inch videotapes, but I only have maybe half of them, I think.
Yeah, we transferred the night scene shows because the night scene shows were interviews with all the gay figures, everybody from Chief Tom Potter to city council people to people within the gay community and stuff, running different organizations. It's a real history of the Portland gay community. And most of that was saved, and a lot of it's been turned over to the gay archives, both in Portland and in somewhere else. Because it's a history that will be totally lost if they weren't saved.
Yeah. So when you moved down to California, back to Palm Springs, you went to nursing school, right?
Well, not at first. I became a medical assistant for a number of years, and then while working at an urgent care center, I working with nurses, and a lot of them said, "Hey, Lanny, you should become an RN." And I said, "Okay." So I went back to school, and at the age of 60, I became a registered nurse.
And then
Talk
you
about a difference.
opened a medical marijuana clinic in the Inland Empire in Riverside, California.
That's right. You came to me and asked me about opening up one in Palm Springs, and I said, "Oh, we already have a bunch of doctors writing recommendations in Palm Springs, but there was nobody in the Western Inland Empire in the city of Riverside, which is a city of like 300,000 people." And I said, "Let's open it there." So we opened it there, and I ran it there for like, I don't know, 5-6 years. We gave out thousands and thousands of recommendations.
We had a 5th anniversary with Dennis Perone, Paul Krasner, Anna Boyce,
Yep.
Judge Jim Gray, and
I also got involved in being part of a dispensary that opened up next door to the doctor's office, which by the luck of the draw became very much involved in legal situations. And that is in that back in this, we opened a dispensary in 2008, I think it was, or 2009, using Senate Bill 420, which created, Senate Bill the problem with Proposition 215 that legalized medical marijuana in California, and it was the first legislation ever to liberalize marijuana laws, and that's why it was so significant. In 1996, it said if you got a doctor's recommendation, you could use marijuana. It was essentially marijuana legalization with a doctor's recommendation. But the problem with Proposition 215 is that it didn't have any kind of mechanism there for patients to get their medicine. And so what was happening is people would grow their own medicine, they'd get busted, and they'd be charged with cultivating marijuana, and they get, prison and all this kind of stuff. Finally, in 2004, this California state legislature, thanks to groups like NORML and some other groups and what we were doing, they passed a bill called Senate Bill 420. Now, everybody knows what 420 stands for. And the legislature says, oh, that was just a coincidence. Right. And the sun's coming up in the west. But listen, it was Senate Bill 420. And what 420 did was it created a program where you can get a medical marijuana ID card so you couldn't be arrested. But the major thing what it did was it started a distribution program where you can actually obtain cannabis legally. And what it did was it said that patients could form cooperatives and collectives to produce their marijuana. Now, a cooperative, there is a stack of legislation 10 feet high of what a cooperative is, but they'd also use the word collective. And there's no legislation saying what a collective is. So a collective became whatever you said it was. And what would happen is these patients would get together and they would start growing marijuana, and these collectives would start growing big. They'd be 100 people, 200 people. Some of these collectives had 3 and 4 and 5,000 patients in them. Well, when you have that many people, you got to have a place to distribute the marijuana, right? Well, in this country, we call places that distribute items stores. And what started happening was these collectives started opening stores on Main Street, selling marijuana to the members. And the police just freaked out. My gosh, right here on Main Street in River City, we've got stores selling marijuana. So they got the California Chief Police Association to issue this white paper. And what happened is the police chiefs and almost every single city and the sheriffs in the county went running to the board of supervisors, went running to the city council, and they would wave this white paper issued by the California Chief Police Association. And they'd say, look what the chief of police say. You allow these dispensaries to open up and hell's going to go to, businesses are going to move and crime is going to go up and children are going to be using marijuana. And so all these cities panicked. Well, part of this white paper issued by the California Chief Police Association contained a model ordinance that would say you pass this ordinance and you ban dispensaries under your zoning ordinances. And this is unheard of. They've never heard of banning a state permitted activity under a zoning ordinance. And so we had lawyers saying they can't do that. And they said, yes, we can. Well, our collective was in the city of Riverside. There was 10 different dispensaries operating there. And the city of Riverside sent us these cease and desist orders and saying, you have to stop doing this because we ban dispensaries under zoning ordinances. And we said, no, we don't have to. Well, we got sued. They got sued, but by luck of the draw, the collective that I was with went all the way to the California Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled that, yes, cities can ban a state-permitted activity like a California dispensary under their zoning ordinances. And we closed down. And I don't think we should have lost. We didn't have the city of Riverside spent over $300,000 hiring Best and Krieger, one of the biggest law firms in California. And they had a whole bunch of attorneys. We didn't have that kind of money. We hired one lawyer, and he did a good job, but it was way over his head. He had never argued a case before the California Supreme Court before, and what was really sad was that although we had asked other dispensaries to help us, give us money so we can hire a team of lawyers, they didn't. And so we had to fend this thing all by ourselves. And so we lost. And it's one of the things I've always learned is how stupid marijuana people, business people are. They don't have the sense that you have to sit there and put out money to protect your business. And they all lost big time because cities now have the right to put them out of business because through their zoning ordinance. But so that's and so that was the end of that dispensary. But the clinic kept operating. We kept issuing doctor's recommendations for several more years after that, until around the time Proposition 64 was passed in California, which legalized marijuana. And when 64 became passed, there was no real reason for people to spend the money anymore or take the time to get a doctor's recommendation. Now it was legal for them to grow 6 plants. They could go to a store and buy their marijuana and this kind of stuff. There still is some reasons why a person may want to get a medical marijuana recommendation, but there isn't a single doctor's office that I'm aware of anywhere in the state of California to get a doctor's recommendation. Now you get it online, and you pay $35 or $40 something, the doctor issues you a recommendation. There's some benefits to still having a medical recommendation. There's 2 major benefits. One, under Proposition 64, you only can grow 6 plants, and that's not enough. But if you have a medical marijuana recommendation, you can grow as much marijuana as medically necessary. That was a rule by the California Supreme Court. So one of the reasons you want to get a medical marijuana recommendation, if you want to cultivate, you want to grow more than 6 plants, once you have a medical marijuana recommendation, you can go a lot more. The other thing is, if you're under 21, you can't use marijuana unless you get a doctor's recommendation. Then you can use marijuana. So for people who are 18, 19, and 20, if they want to use cannabis legally, if they want to go to a dispensary to buy it, they have to get a medical marijuana recommendations. So that's the 2 groups in California that are still getting medical marijuana recommendations.
Here in Oregon, we still help patients, and both of those groups are among our clientele. But
Here in Oregon, what's the advantage of being a medical marijuana patient in Oregon, other than
grow a lot more again? Instead of growing 4 plants per household, you can grow 36 plants that are less than 2 feet tall, 12 plants that are more than 2 feet tall, and 6 plants that are flowering. You can grow all those at the same time. If you're on probation or parole, you can use marijuana that you wouldn't be able to use otherwise. If you
Wait, let me get this straight. In Oregon, if you're on probation and parole, you're not allowed to use marijuana?
That's right. Or beer or alcohol.
Oh, you can't drink either?
No.
Can you smoke cigarettes?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. They sell cigarettes in
the
jail.
most dangerous of them all, they're allowed to do.
But then there are other benefits. You can travel with cannabis. When you go to Hawaii, for instance, marijuana is not legal recreationally or for adult use in Hawaii. But if you have a medical permit, there are dispensaries, and you can get a tourist medical card. You show them your Oregon, California, whatever permit. You pay them.
So Hawaii has reciprocity.
Yes, there's reciprocity.
California does not have reciprocity. You can't bring your marijuana from Oregon into California legally.
I mean, I always carry my marijuana.
Oh, of course. I mean, they don't have, even though California has those agricultural checkpoints when you drive in there, they don't check you.
No. So those are some of the benefits. There are also people who have cannabis for job reasons. They can't, for some reason, use marijuana in their job, and if they don't have a medical permit. That's another group of people. But the biggest advantage that most people get their medical card for these days is because you get the taxes taken off at the local dispensary. So that's a 17 to 25% discount. And there are some dispensaries that will also add another 20% discount on top of it. So
that's a good point, Paul. The same here in California. If you're a medical marijuana patient, a lot of the taxes can be, you don't have to pay the taxes. That's true.
If you're using, if you're smoking an ounce or 2 a month, it pays off after a couple of months, the tax free.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the taxes. I mean, I don't know how high the taxes are in Oregon, but they're absurd in California, though they're 1/3 the cost of the product. At least 30% is what you're paying in taxes. It's crazy.
That too, but you also have some stores that will sell you a discount cannabis, another discount on top of the taxes. But that's another one of the benefits that you can, and you can pay a lot more. You can
it's all stupid. It's all stupid because cannabis is. I mean, I understand in Oregon, cannabis is gone way down in price, but it's still outrageously priced. I mean, what does a pound of marijuana sell for in Oregon?
Some of it's just going for $100 a pound.
Well, that's cheap. That's really great.
But you can't get $100 a pound for anything. Maybe like saffron, which is just the little pistils in the saffron flowers.
But the thing still is, even $100 a pound is absurd. Marijuana is a plant, and there is no agricultural product out there that is being sold for $100 a pound in its unprocessed raw form. And marijuana should be selling for about the same price as tomatoes, because it's no more difficult to grow marijuana than it is to grow tomatoes. But even if it's 10 times more difficult to grow marijuana than tomatoes, then we're only talking $30 a pound.
Yeah, that's about right. $30 to $50 a pound in terms of, because they have to harvest the flowers, they can mold, they have to process them and dry it properly and cure it. They have to trim it. Trimming.
You have to do the same thing with tobacco. You have to do the same thing with grapes, a lot of things. And the trimming is now done by machines. They don't hand trim anymore.
Yeah, no, they do hand trim, and they get
you don't have to.
They don't have to.
If marijuana is selling $30 a pound, you don't worry too much about there's a little bit more waste by the machine than there is by hand trimming.
A lot of people are out of business because they didn't plan on the drop in prices. Indoor cannabis gets a higher price. Greenhouse cannabis gets a higher price as well. So
cannabis should be just like wine, and you can have massive growers, kind of like Gallo and Madabi, growing thousands of acres or contracting with farmers to produce thousands of acres of cannabis and selling it under their brand name. Or you can also have thousands of farmers growing their own own grapes and producing their own wineries up and down the state. And these wineries are even selling their product in Costco. So, and you can still get, you get decent quality wine for $10, $15 a bottle.
Yeah, or cheaper.
And my goal has always been, I will know legalization has really gotten to the point where it should be, is when you can go to Costco and buy cannabis. And the reason I say that is because if you're going to buy it at Costco, it's going to be good quality, it's going to be reasonably priced. The only problem is you have to buy a kilogram at a time.
Yeah. So you have become a big muckety-muck in the California Democratic Party. You started.
I wouldn't say I'm a big muckety-muck. I'm actively involved in the party.
You don't have to, but you started the Brownie Mary Club. Now, for people who don't know who Brownie Mary was, Brownie Mary worked in San Francisco with AIDS patients who were dying.
Right. When she was in her 70s, she started baking marijuana-infused brownies and taking them to AIDS patients in the San Francisco hospitals. If you're an AIDS patient, brownies, marijuana was very, very important. To help you feel better, it helped you be able to take the medications because it helped counteract some of the negative side effects from medications, and it also just improved your overall sense of well-being. And she was arrested three times by the San Francisco police for distributing marijuana-baked brownies to patients in hospitals. She was never, ever prosecuted. Let me tell you, the interesting about Brownie Mary is that, when the reason I had the Brownie Mary Democratic Club is one of the things I learned from this fiasco of going to the Supreme Court and losing this case about marijuana being allowed to ban dispensaries under their zoning ordinances is that marijuana people had no political clout. We were a joke. People laughed at us. The politicians laughed at us. They wouldn't take us seriously. And I could see why, because of the way these cannabis businesses just reacted to the idea of, helping the legal scene, this kind of stuff. So I began to look around and said, well, we've got to get politically active. So how do I get politically active? So I started to look around for how other groups that are not, say socially acceptable became active. And the group I focused on, of course, was the gay community. In the gay community, I don't know who's lower on the ladder of social respectability, people who smoke pot are people who have sex with members of the same sex. But we're all both pretty low on the ladder of social respectability. But the gay community has somehow worked their way all the way up so far that the President of the United States, Barack Obama, said, hey, I was wrong. I am now in favor of same-sex marriage. And I said, wow, how did they ever get to that point? We couldn't get Barack Obama, who was a pothead in high school and in college, to sit there and say, hey, marijuana should be legal. But he would say that gay people should be able to have same-sex marriage. And so I said, well, how did they get to that point? How did they get to that point? So I looked into it, and what they did is they started at the very bottom of the rung of the political ladder. They started to get involved in the Democratic County Central Committees. This is the grassroots of political activism, the county central committees. They encourage Democrats to run for offices in the local leagues, and they sit there and get the support for people running for Congress or people running the Senate and this kind of stuff. And so I went to one, and what the gay community did is they went there and they formed these gay clubs. They formed like the Harvey Milk Democratic Club or the Stonewall Democratic Club, and then they would get involved with Democratic politicians, just work their way up. So I went to the Riverside County Democratic Party and said, I want to start a cannabis Democratic Club. And surprisingly, they all said, yeah, sure, go ahead, do it. And so I said, okay. And so I came up with a name. I filled out all the paperwork, and the name I was to call was the Cannabis Democratic Club of Riverside County. And several people in the Riverside County Democratic, oh, you can't do that. You can't name a club after a Schedule I drug. And I said, well, okay. Well, so I went back to the gay community and saw what they did. And they weren't called the Gay Democratic Clubs or the Lesbian Democratic Clubs or anything like that. They named it after a famous person like Harvey Milk or a special event like Stonewall. So I said, well, I'm going to do the same thing. So I began to look who we can name it after. And the first person I thought was Bob Marley. It's going to be the Bob Marley Democratic Club. And then I said, oh, wait a minute, dreadlocks and all that. That's not the image we want. And then I thought, wanted to name it after Dennis Perone. Dennis Perone is the father of Proposition 215. He was the one that changed its perspective by getting marijuana legalized medically. And I was going to name it after Dennis Perone. But I knew Dennis. I knew Dennis very well. I knew the minute we did something he didn't like, he'd be on the phone to me saying, Lanny, take my name off that club. So I began looking around, and then I came up with the Brownie Mary. Now, Brownie Mary's real name was Mary Jane Rathbun, and she began baking brownies in her 70s and taking them to patients in AIDS patients in hospitals. And she became very well known. She was arrested, like I said, 3 times in the place, but and they eventually named a day in her honor in San Francisco, Brownie Mary Day. And I thought, this is the name I want to give the club. I want to call it Brownie Mary Democratic Club for 3 reasons. One, it talks about the importance of cannabis for a person's health. Cannabis was essential for the health of so many medical marijuana patients. Really important to them. Number 2, it also was fun. You know, Brownie Mary, and you know, cannabis is a fun thing. We can't sit there and sweep that under the rug. Cannabis is a fun thing. And number 3, the marijuana movement is male dominated, and we have to highlight the contributions made by women to the marijuana movement. And that's why we named it after Brownie Mary, and we became the Brownie Mary Democrat. We were chartered by the Riverside County, and a few days later, we were actually chartered by the California Democratic Party. We became the first organization ever to be officially a marijuana organization, ever to be officially affiliated with a major political party in the United States. Eventually, in 2014, I introduced a plank to the Democratic Party platform calling for the legalization of marijuana, similar in a way to alcohol and tobacco. It got passed. It was the first time that I'm aware of that any major political party actually endorsed the legalization of marijuana. And 2 years later, when Proposition 64 became, the wheels were already greased for the support of the California Democratic Party for Proposition 64. And a lot of us believe it was the support of the California Democratic Party's reason it passed. One of the reasons there's 8 million registered Democrats at that time in the state of California. 60% of them were in favor of legalization. That's what all the polls showed. But that still left a couple million that were sitting on the fence. Well, in the 2016 elections, the Democrats were sending out all kinds of mailers to Democrats saying, vote for this person, vote for that person. and they every single one piece almost also had a little space where it said vote yes on Proposition 64. The Democratic Party was telling every Democrat in the state of California, vote yes on Proposition 64. And we believe that it was this, that a lot of these Democrats that have been sitting on the fence on whether to vote for legalization were convinced, yep, the Democratic Party says we should vote for it, we're going to vote for it. And I think that's one of the reasons it passed. It's certainly one of the reasons it passed with such a high percentage of votes. 57% of the people voted for it. But the Democratic Party, and it wouldn't have happened without the Democratic Party. And they don't get credit for it. They don't get credit for it. It's all the advertising and all that kind of stuff, which played a big role too. But I really think it was the Democratic Party that was the real success of why 64 passed.
Does the Brownie Mary Democratic Party Club still exist?
Oh, yeah, we're still there. We're there all the time. We got the Democratic Party to pass all kinds of resolutions, repealing the IRS 280E, about telling this, right now, cities and counties can still ban marijuana dispensaries under their zone ordinance. We got them to pass a resolution calling that should be repealed. One of the major ones we actually got turned into legislation was we had passed the hospitals. Hospitals had been not allowing medical marijuana patients to receive organ transplants. So if you needed a liver and you used cannabis medically, you were denied an organ transplant. We got the part, what?
I have known more than 100 people who got a death sentence when they needed a liver or...
That's right. So we got the Democratic Party to pass a resolution calling on Democrats in the state legislature to pass a law telling hospitals they cannot deny a patient a liver transplant, any kind of organ transplant because they use marijuana medically. We got it passed, and it passed the California state legislature, and now hospitals cannot deny a person using from an organ transplant so that we can actually turn things into legislation to make things better. The taxes are too high. We got the government to reduce the taxation here in California. Not enough, but they did reduce some of it. So we have this. We can do that. So yes, we're still very much involved with the California Democratic Party.
That's great. Yeah, I have, as I said, known more than 100 transplant patients who've been taken off transplant lists.
Yeah, can't do that. They can't do that in California anymore. Cannot do it.
Well, this was back before they ended marijuana prohibition, but
well, they can still say, hey, use marijuana, we're not going to give you a liver transplant. They say if you use alcohol, we're not going to give you a liver transplant. But there's a viable reason why they're not going to give you a liver transplant if you use alcohol, because your liver was destroyed by alcohol. But cannabis does not destroy your liver.
Marijuana not only doesn't destroy your liver, it promotes homeostasis. It keeps your body systems, and you are less likely to reject your transplant if you're using cannabis. And you're less likely to suffer any of the other problems associated with transplants.
And you can go on the list of things that cannabis benefits people's health, everything from Alzheimer, because it inhibits the development of that protein plaque on the brain. They keep coming with all these Alzheimer's drugs, which are, they don't work, or there's cost a fortune. The fact is, there's all kinds of research that shows that this protein plaque that develops on the brain is a precursor to Alzheimer's. It almost never happens without this protein plaque forming on the brain. And it's all kinds of research out there showing that cannabis, the cannabinoids in cannabis, interfere with the development of this protein plaque. So you smoke cannabis all your life, you're less likely to develop Alzheimer's.
So what are you doing these days? I know you're a radio show host there in San Bernardino, right?
It's in Redlands, actually, which is near San Bernardino. But yeah. I'm doing a radio show, but the show's called Lanny Sense. It's not just about cannabis. Yes, a lot of the shows are about cannabis, but it's about other things too. It's about one of my other favorite topics, atheism. I hate religion. I hate this God stuff just drives me absolutely nutso. And we got to educate people why they got to give up this belief in supernatural forces. And it's also very political. We'll talk about politics and climate change and the banning of books in schools and this kind of stuff. We also go into all that kind of stuff. So it's a much more broad approach than just cannabis. But we do have cannabis all the time. We had you on the show, of course, talking about cannabis. We've had a person who grows from Anza that grows cannabis up in Anza in this area up there that's been having all kinds of problems with the police and so on. So we tackle that subject too.
So you worked in the Democratic Party for a number of years now. The Democratic nominee was elected as the Attorney General, Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris.
Elected to the United States Senate. And now it looks like she's going to be the next president of the United States. What do you think?
Let me tell you something about Kamala Harris.
Please do.
You know, lots of people say, oh, when she was Attorney General, thousands of people were still convicted. Listen, Dale Geringer from Cal Normal sent this information out. Let me tell you a little about Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris was the Attorney General of California. The AG doesn't convict anyone. Local prosecutors do. AGs are responsible for enforcing California's laws, not overriding them.
She was the San Francisco prosecutor, though, before
Right.
she became AG.
Yeah. Now, it says Kamala Harris opposed a 2010 legalization initiative, Proposition 19. Dale writes that any responsible attorney general would have done so. The initiative was carelessly written so as to pose formidable enforcement problems for the state. For example, under Proposition 19, West Hollywood could have made it legal to grow, sell, and transport a ton of marijuana for adult use, while it could have still been a felony to carry an ounce of it over the city line into Los Angeles. Before being Attorney General, Kamala Harris was the District Attorney of San Francisco. Again, the DA is responsible for enforcing the existing laws and rarely gets involved in individual cases, especially drug offenses. Kamala Harris continued the liberal policies of her predecessor with regards to marijuana, including keeping her hands off the city's many medical marijuana collectives, which would have been prosecuted in many other jurisdictions. Kamala Harris is probably the only major party candidate openly espousing legal marijuana. Good for her. So, the fact that she's running, she looks like, she's going to be the president of the Democrats' nomination for cannabis people. You don't want Donald Trump. Donald Trump have you seen all those pictures of Trump with all these police? All the police unions endorse Donald Trump. I would be very highly suspect of anybody being endorsed by a police union as being favorable to us. And what's going to happen if he gets elected as president is he will have to reward all these police unions. And one of the things they would like to see is the drug war come back, because they sorely miss the $50 billion a year that this country was spending enforcing drug law. We spent over $1 trillion. Most of it went to law enforcement and to prisons and this kind of stuff for people who were using drugs, including cannabis. And they want that money back. They want that money back, and Trump will give it back to them. He's going to turn this into a police state. He will. He's got that Kasi Pamitas law, whatever that insurrection law, where he can sit there and nationalize the National Guard and send them in you're protesting Trump's policies. He'll send the National Guard in after you. And don't you think he will unleash the local police departments to go after you as well? You have to be, anybody who's listening to this that supports Trump, you are out of your mind.
Right. I agree. Trump wanted to send the police in here and crack down on peaceful protests in Portland, and said, we were a city at siege, maybe a little block or two area downtown, maybe a little more sometimes, but it was pretty outrageous.
He's told out, and you can't, they've rewritten the Republican platform saying, we'll let states enforce it. The federals won't do it. And bullshit. They're lying. Just like the Supreme Court justices that Trump nominated for the Supreme Court, when they testified before Congress, and the Congress asked him, "Are you going to respect Roe versus Wade?" It's been on 50, and they all said yes, they would. And the minute they got into the Supreme Court, they overturned it. And part of that Dobbs decision also says, well, this doesn't apply to other things, like gay marriages and contraception. Don't you believe them? They are liars. They've learned to lie. Donald Trump has taught Republicans that it's okay to lie. Just tell them whatever the people want to hear, and then when you get in power, screw them over. So you can better believe that Trump gets elected, there's going to be a national abortion ban bill passed, for sure. You're going to see the Supreme Court overturn gay marriage. It's going to happen. You're going to see the Supreme Court overturn contraception. They're going to do all these things. They're going to say, oh, we're not, but don't believe them. They lie and they lie and they lie and they lie. It's part of being a Republican nowadays. Didn't used to be. Republicans used to be honorable. They're not anymore. They're all liars. And Trump is the one that's gave them permission to lie.
And with the Supreme Court giving the president all these new powers with the recent ruling here just last month, Trump, he will never peacefully go. Yeah, I mean, he's already proven that. He didn't peacefully leave the first time, you know? So he's
it would have been interesting to see it for Biden to test that Supreme Court ruling and order somebody from the FBI to kill Donald Trump. And then he could have said, hey, this was an official act, so you can't prosecute me for ordering somebody to kill Donald Trump.
Yeah, well, I'm glad he didn't test that. Hopefully the voters of this country will.
Well, of course not. Democrats wouldn't do that. Republicans would. I don't think for a doubt that if Trump gets in there, he will order people to be killed because it's an official act and it's okay.
Right. Did you ever meet Kamala in the Democratic Party when?
I've seen her at Democratic conventions. I've heard her speak many times. I think I shook her hand, but I actually never had a chance to talk with her. Unlike a lot of others, I've talked with Nancy Pelosi. I had a nice conversation with her. I've had with many of our U.S. senators and stuff. You know, Joe Biden once spoke at the convention. That was I didn't get to meet him, but this is what's really interesting about it. You get people. You folks out here listening to this, you really need to get involved politically. It's very exciting. It really is. And the way to get started is to get involved in your local Democratic Central Committee. Just if you live in, Inyo County, just go to DuckDuckGo. Don't use Google. Use DuckDuckGo. Go in there and put down Inyo County Democratic Party, and they'll bring you up all the contact information, and you should get involved. It's exciting. You meet wonderful people, and you can actually make significant changes to your community that are beneficial for people wherever you live.
Well, I'd like to thank you, Lanny, for coming on our show. Again, this is Lanny Swerdlow. He actually started this show back in 1996. He named this show, and our slogan, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Still use that, huh?
Yeah, we still use that here, and you used it for the first 120 shows. You were the voice that used it. But
well, if I can leave with just two things to let people know. One is I've written a book called the Cannabis Chronicles, and it's available through Amazon Kindle books. Just go to Amazon in the search bar, put down Cannabis Lanny, and it'll bring the book up. And what it is, I wrote for a magazine called Culture for almost 10 years. I wrote a column called Healthy Living. And this is a collection of 120 columns on about healthy living, everything from using it for cancer, for glaucoma, using it for sex, all kinds of things and it's only $4.20. And each article is only about 700 words. So it's a good toilet book, and you can keep it and you can read it each time you use the toilet. It's just long enough for you to sit there for one reading, and it'll help you pass the time. The other thing is, if you want to contact me, you can send me an email. It's a very simple email address. Send it to RN Lanny, that's RN as in registered nurse, RNLANNY at AOL.com. I'd love to hear from you, and I promise I will reply back to any emails I get if you want to find out if you got any questions.
Well, thanks for coming on the show, Lanny. I really appreciate it. Thanks for helping start this show, and keep working to restore hemp.
Yes, and thank you, Paul, for everything you have done. You have been transformative. You're one of the people that got me, because when I was first starting out in the cannabis reform movement, you were one of the first person I came into. So you were very much of a mentor to me, and you showed me what could be done, what an individual person can do. So thank you very much for everything you've done for the cannabis movement.
You're very welcome. All right. Thanks again. We did.